January 20th, 1942, Darwin Harbor, Northern Australia. Lieutenant Commander Hugh Marsden gripped the metal railing of the salvage vessel as it lurched over another swell, his knuckles white against the rust-stained steel. Below him, in water so murky that visibility dropped to zero within 15 feet, his dive team was descending toward something that shouldn't exist, a Japanese submarine that had gone down 3 weeks earlier under circumstances so peculiar that Naval Intelligence had ordered an immediate salvage operation. What they would find inside that submarine would shatter everything Allied intelligence believed about Japanese naval capabilities, and the contents would prove so shocking that the discovery would remain classified for over 30 years. But in that moment, as Marsden watched the bubbles rising from his divers below, he had no idea that this single recovery operation would alter the course of the Pacific War in ways no battle ever could. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The submarine they were hunting was the I-124, an Imperial Japanese Navy vessel that had been stalking Allied shipping lanes along Australia's northern coast since early January. The I-124 was part of Japan's Submarine Division 3, a fleet of advanced boats that had been terrorizing merchant vessels from Singapore to Darwin with impunity. These submarines represented Japan's technological edge in underwater warfare, vessels that could dive deeper, stay submerged longer, and strike with devastating precision. On January 20th, the I-124 had made a fatal error. While preparing to torpedo the Australian corvette HMAS Deloraine, the submarine had surfaced at periscope depth in shallow water, exposing itself to depth charge attack. The Deloraine, along with HMAS Lithgow and HMAS Katoomba, had pounded the area with depth charges until oil and debris surfaced, confirming the kill. What made this sinking extraordinary wasn't the kill itself. Allied forces had sunk Japanese submarines before. What made it extraordinary was the location. The I-124 had gone down in only 130 feet of water, shallow enough for divers to reach with the equipment available in early 1942. Most submarine kills occurred in deep ocean trenches where recovery was impossible. This submarine had settled on a relatively flat bottom in clear tropical waters, sitting upright as if waiting to be explored. Naval Intelligence immediately recognized the opportunity. Never before had Allied forces captured an intact Japanese military submarine. The intelligence value was incalculable. Commander Marsden had been given 72 hours to organize the operation before the Japanese Navy realized where their submarine had gone down and attempted their own recovery. The orders from Admiral Ernest King were explicit and chilling. Recover the submarine's contents at all costs. Priority 1. Codebooks. Priority 2. Technical specifications. Priority 3. Any intelligence materials. This operation takes precedence over all other salvage activities in theatre. Marsden assembled a team of experienced Navy divers, men who had worked on salvage operations in Sydney Harbour and knew how to work in dangerous conditions. Chief Petty Officer William Ridgway would lead the actual dive team. At 43 years old, Ridgway was ancient by diving standards, but his experience was unmatched. He had worked on submarine salvage before, knew how to navigate flooded compartments in zero visibility, and possessed the calm temperament necessary for work that killed younger, more impulsive divers. The risks were staggering. The submarine could be booby-trapped. Japanese sailors might have survived in air pockets and could be armed. Unstable depth charges might still be aboard. The hull could collapse at any moment. Toxic gases could accumulate in sealed compartments. Sharp metal edges in the darkness could slice through diving suits and air hoses. Every man on the dive team knew they might not surface. On January 22nd, just 2 days after the sinking, the salvage vessel anchored directly above the submarine's estimated position. Sonar had pinpointed the wreck, and the dive team prepared for the first reconnaissance descent. Ridgway went down first, descending the anchor line through water that transitioned from tropical blue to murky green to absolute darkness within 60 feet. At 110 feet, his boots touched something solid, the submarine's forward deck. The I-124 lay on the bottom intact, Its hull bent slightly amidships, where depth charges had cracked the pressure hull, but otherwise remarkably preserved. Ridgway's first observation, transmitted via communication line to the surface, was prophetic. She went down fast. Hatches are sealed. Whatever's inside stayed inside. Over the next 6 hours, Ridgway and his team conducted external surveys, photographing the hull, identifying potential entry points, and planning the breach. The conning tower hatch was their best option, high enough to potentially avoid flooding, large enough to extract materials, and structurally strong enough to support cutting operations. On January 23rd, the cutting began. Navy welders modified their acetylene torches for underwater use, a dangerous improvisation that sent streams of bubbles and molten metal cascading through the water. The work was agonizingly slow. Every 15 minutes, divers had to surface to avoid nitrogen narcosis and decompression sickness. Each dive lasted only 20 minutes of productive work before safety protocols demanded ascent. By sunset, they had cut through the outer hatch seal. The conning tower hatch opened with a rush of trapped air that nearly knocked the diver off the hull. The escaping gases brought with them a smell that penetrated even the diving helmet. Death, seawater, diesel fuel, and something else, something chemical that the divers couldn't identify. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Ridgway was the first man inside. He squeezed through the conning tower hatch into the submarine's control room, his diving lamp cutting through absolute darkness. The beam revealed a scene frozen in time, Japanese sailors still at their stations, killed instantly by the depth charge concussion that had ruptured the pressure hull. Bodies floating in the flooded compartment, their faces obscured by the murky water, control panels smashed by the explosive force, papers floating everywhere, technical manuals and charts drifting in the underwater currents like snow. But what stopped Ridgway cold, what made him grip his lamp so tightly his hand cramped, was what he saw on the navigation table. A leather case, secured with metal clasps, stamped with Japanese characters, and a red seal that even Ridgway recognized as indicating top-secret materials. He grabbed the case and something else caught his eye, a wooden box, about the size of a briefcase, ornately decorated with brass fittings and secured with a lock that had corroded in the seawater. The box was heavy, far heavier than its size suggested. Ridgway made the decision instantly. He signaled for the surface team to send down a recovery bag. These items were coming up now, before anything else, before any further exploration. 15 minutes later, the leather case and wooden box broke the surface, hauled up by the dive team with extreme care. Commander Marsden personally received them, water streaming from the leather and wood. He didn't open them on deck. His orders were explicit. These materials were to be delivered sealed to Naval Intelligence in Brisbane. The contents were too sensitive for anyone below the rank of Rear Admiral to examine. But the dive team's work was far from complete. Over the next 3 days, they made repeated descents into the I-124, each dive bringing up more materials that would prove devastating to Japanese security. From the radio room, they recovered code books. Not just any code books, but the current edition of the Imperial Japanese Navy's operational codes, the same codes that Japanese destroyers, cruisers, and battleships were using at that very moment to communicate across the Pacific. The code books were printed on water-soluble paper designed to dissolve if submerged, but the submarine had flooded so quickly, the pressure change so extreme, that the books had been compressed and protected by surrounding equipment. Entire pages were readable. From the captain's cabin, they recovered operational orders dating back to December. These orders revealed Japanese submarine patrol zones, attack protocols, and most critically, the locations of Japanese submarine bases throughout the Southwest Pacific. Intelligence officers would later confirm that these documents exposed the entire Japanese submarine warfare strategy for the opening months of the Pacific War. From the torpedo room, they found something that terrified the dive team. One of the torpedoes was unlike anything Allied intelligence had seen. It was enormous, nearly 24 feet long with a warhead that analysis would later reveal contained over 1,000 pounds of explosive. This was the Type 95 torpedo, a weapon so advanced that it made Allied torpedoes look primitive by comparison. It could travel at 49 knots faster than most destroyers and hit targets over 12 miles away. The Americans had nothing comparable. The engineering spaces yielded technical manuals for the submarine's diesel engines, battery systems, and diving planes. Japanese submarine technology was years ahead of American designs in several critical areas. Their batteries could sustain longer submerged operations. Their diesel engines were more efficient. Their hull design allowed deeper diving depths. Every technical drawing recovered represented intelligence that would take Allied engineers months or years to reverse engineer through combat observation alone. But the most shocking discovery waited in the captain's safe. The dive team brought up the entire safe, cutting it free from the bulkhead and hauling it to the surface with block and tackle. The safe was delivered unopened to Brisbane on January 27th, exactly 1 week after the submarine's sinking. What happened next occurred in a secure room in Brisbane's Naval Intelligence headquarters, witnessed by only 4 officers with top-secret clearances. Rear Admiral John Crace, personally supervised as a locksmith, cut through the safe's corroded mechanism. The contents, when finally revealed, included materials so sensitive that 2 of the officers present were immediately transferred to other duties and ordered never to discuss what they had seen. The leather case contained operational maps of the entire Southwest Pacific region, marked with Japanese naval movements, anchorage points, and most incredibly planned invasion routes for operations that hadn't yet occurred. Someone in the Japanese Navy had been planning months ahead, and their submarine captain had been carrying these plans when his boat went down. The wooden box contained something that defied immediate explanation. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth and remarkably well preserved, were documents written in a mixture of Japanese and German. The documents appeared to be technical exchanges between Japanese and German naval engineers, discussing advanced weapon systems including acoustic torpedoes, advanced fire control systems, and something the translators initially dismissed as fantasy, a guided bomb that could be steered after release. The Allies wouldn't encounter German-guided bombs until 1943. This intelligence suggested the Japanese had been aware of these weapons in early 1942, perhaps even collaborating on their development. But nestled at the bottom of the wooden box was an item that seemed almost mundane until its significance was understood: a small notebook, water-damaged but partially readable, that appeared to be a personal diary belonging to the submarine's intelligence officer. The diary entries, painstakingly translated over the following weeks, revealed something that sent shockwaves through Allied command. The intelligence officer had been documenting Japanese Naval Intelligence's assessment of American military capabilities, and the assessments were devastatingly accurate. The Japanese knew about American code-breaking efforts. They knew about radar installations. They knew about production capabilities and reinforcement schedules. They knew far more than Allied intelligence had believed possible. One diary entry from January 15th, just 5 days before the submarine sank, was particularly chilling. The intelligence officer had written, "Received confirmation from Tokyo that American cryptographic section has made progress against our naval codes. Headquarters insists the compromise is minimal, and our main operational codes remain secure. I am not convinced. The Americans have demonstrated capabilities we consistently underestimate. Request to change code protocols was denied due to distribution difficulties." This entry proved that at least some Japanese officers understood their codes were vulnerable, but bureaucratic inertia and overconfidence prevented adequate response. The diary became one of the most valuable intelligence documents recovered during the entire war. The physical recovery of materials from the I-124 continued for 2 weeks. The dive team worked in rotating shifts, descending into the submarine's dark compartments and methodically stripping everything of intelligence value. They recovered star charts used for celestial navigation, revealing which reference points Japanese navigators preferred. They found personal letters from crew members that, when analyzed, provided insights into Japanese naval morale and training. They discovered maintenance logs that revealed how often Japanese submarines needed repairs and what components failed most frequently. Intelligence that would help Allied forces target Japanese supply lines. The human cost of the recovery operation was significant. Chief Petty Officer William Ridgway suffered decompression sickness after a particularly long dive and spent 3 weeks in a recompression chamber. Another diver, Petty Officer James Morrison, had his air hose severed by sharp metal inside the submarine and barely made it to the surface alive. A third diver experienced nitrogen narcosis at depth and had to be physically restrained during decompression to prevent him from attempting to dive again. The psychological toll was perhaps worse. The divers worked alongside the bodies of Japanese sailors, young men who had died doing their duty. Removing intelligence materials while corpses floated nearby created moral complexities that haunted several team members for years afterward. By February 10th, Naval Intelligence determined they had extracted everything of value. The I-124 was left on the bottom, a tomb for the 80 crew members who had gone down with her. The Australian Navy placed the wreck off-limits and classified its location. The submarine would remain undisturbed until 1972, when Japanese officials requested permission to conduct memorial services at the site. The immediate intelligence windfall from the I-124 was unprecedented, but the true impact wouldn't become clear for months. The codebooks allowed Allied cryptographers to read Japanese submarine communications with devastating effectiveness. Within weeks, American submarines were being positioned along routes that Japanese boats had considered secret. Japanese submarine losses began climbing at rates that baffled Tokyo headquarters. The technical intelligence shaped American submarine development for the next 2 years. Engineers at the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard studied the Japanese torpedo designs and began developing American torpedoes with improved range and speed. The battery technology observed in the I-124 influenced American submarine battery design, improving submerged endurance times. The hull design features were incorporated into later American submarine classes, allowing deeper diving depths that would prove crucial in combat operations. But perhaps the most significant impact came from the operational documents. The invasion plans found aboard the I-124 revealed Japanese strategic thinking with frightening clarity. Allied commanders could see not just where the Japanese had been, but where they intended to go: Port Moresby, Fiji, Samoa. The stepping stones of Japanese expansion were laid out in captured documents. This foreknowledge allowed Allied forces to begin positioning defenses months before Japanese attacks materialized. The German technical collaboration documents sparked an entirely new intelligence priority. If Germany and Japan were sharing advanced weapons technology, what else were they sharing? The discovery led to increased emphasis on monitoring Axis communications and tracking technology transfers. When German U-boats began arriving in Japanese ports in 1943, carrying technical blueprints and specialized materials, Allied intelligence was ready because they had learned from the I-124 that such cooperation existed. The intelligence officer's diary became required reading for senior Allied commanders. It provided a window into Japanese military thinking that was brutally honest in ways that intercepted communications never could be. The diary revealed Japanese fears, their accurate assessments of American industrial strength, and their recognition that time was not on their side. One entry speculated that Japan had perhaps 6 months to achieve decisive victories before American production overwhelmed them, an assessment that proved remarkably accurate. The recovery of the I-124 set in motion a transformation in Allied intelligence operations that would fundamentally alter how naval warfare was conducted in the Pacific. In the weeks following the Brisbane briefings, a quiet revolution began spreading through Allied naval command structures. The materials recovered from that single submarine created a template for what became known as technical intelligence exploitation. The systematic recovery and analysis of enemy equipment, documents, and materials from battle sites, captured vessels, and downed aircraft. Before the I-124, such recovery efforts had been haphazard, conducted by whoever happened to be present with whatever resources were available. After the I-124, The Allied command realized that battlefield recovery could yield intelligence as valuable as any spy network or code-breaking operation. Commander Marsden's salvage team became the nucleus of a specialized unit that would eventually grow into the Pacific Fleet's Technical Intelligence Center. By March 1942, the Navy had established formal protocols for underwater recovery operations. Specialized dive teams were trained not just in salvage techniques, but in recognizing intelligence materials, preserving water-damaged documents, and operating under combat conditions. The transformation was remarkable. Within 6 months, the Navy had dive teams attached to every major fleet operation, ready to exploit any opportunity to recover enemy materials. These teams would recover intelligence from sunken ships throughout the Pacific, but none would match the comprehensive haul from that first submarine. The code books recovered from the I-124 arrived at Station Cast on Corregidor in early February, just as Japanese forces were tightening their siege of the Philippines. The cryptanalysts there, working in sweltering underground tunnels, immediately recognized the treasure they had received. The books provided current code groups for Japanese submarine communications, but more importantly, they revealed the structure and methodology of Japanese naval encryption systems. Lieutenant Rudolph Fabian, one of Station Cast's senior cryptanalysts, later wrote in his classified report that the I-124 materials advanced their code-breaking efforts by at least 6 months, possibly a full year. The code books allowed them to verify assumptions they had made about Japanese encryption methods and correct errors in their reconstruction of Japanese code systems. But the cryptanalysts noticed something disturbing in the code books. There were marginal notes, handwritten additions that indicated recent changes to encryption procedures. These notes suggested that Japanese naval intelligence was aware of potential security compromises and was attempting to strengthen their systems. The intelligence officer's diary entry about American code-breaking progress wasn't just one man's paranoid speculation. It represented a genuine concern within Japanese naval communications circles. The question that kept Allied cryptanalysts awake at night was whether the Japanese would act on these concerns before the Allies could fully exploit their intelligence advantage. The race between code-breaking and code-changing became a silent war within the larger conflict. The technical manuals recovered from the I-124's engineering spaces arrived at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard in mid-February 1942, where American submarine designers were struggling with persistent problems in their own boats. American torpedoes were failing at catastrophic rates, often running too deep or failing to explode even when they hit targets. American submarines couldn't dive as deep as their commanders wanted, limiting their tactical options. American battery systems couldn't sustain long enough submerged operations, forcing boats to surface in dangerous waters. The Japanese manuals offered solutions to all these problems. The torpedo designs revealed advanced depth-keeping mechanisms that maintained precise running depth regardless of temperature or salinity changes. American torpedoes used simple mechanical depth controls that were affected by water conditions, causing them to run deeper than set. Japanese engineers had solved this problem years earlier with a more sophisticated hydrostatic system. Captain Richard Edwards, the Navy's director of submarine warfare, assembled a team of engineers to study the Japanese designs. What they discovered was humbling. Japanese submarine technology wasn't just competitive with American designs in several critical areas, it was significantly superior. The Japanese had been building submarines since the 1920s, learning from captured German U-boats after World War I and continuously improving their designs. American submarine development had been constrained by Washington Naval Treaty limitations and peacetime budget restrictions, leaving American boats a generation behind in several key technologies. The realization was painful but necessary. American naval superiority couldn't be assumed. It had to be earned through learning from the enemy. The engineering team began incorporating Japanese design features into American submarines still under construction. The improvements were significant but came too slowly to help the submarines already fighting in the Pacific. Those boats would continue struggling with defective torpedoes and limited diving depths until 1943, when improved designs finally reached the fleet. The human cost of this technological gap was measured in submarines lost, attacks that failed, and opportunities missed. Yet without the I-124 recovery, the gap might have persisted for years longer. The intelligence windfall accelerated American submarine development, ultimately contributing to the devastating submarine campaign that would strangle Japan's economy. The operational documents recovered from the captain's cabin revealed something that Allied intelligence had suspected but never confirmed: the full scope of Japanese naval ambitions in the Pacific. The maps showed planned invasion routes extending far beyond what Japan had already conquered. New Guinea, the Solomon Islands, Fiji, Samoa, even the northern coast of Australia were marked as objectives in a grand strategy designed to create a defensive perimeter so vast that America would be forced to negotiate peace rather than fight across thousands of miles of ocean. Admiral Ernest King, Chief of Naval Operations, studied these maps with a mixture of alarm and opportunity. The alarm came from recognizing how thoroughly Japan had planned their expansion, how every invasion built upon previous conquests in a carefully orchestrated strategy. The opportunity came from knowing these plans in advance, allowing Allied forces to prepare defenses before Japanese attacks materialized. One map in particular drew intense scrutiny. It showed Port Moresby in New Guinea, marked with red circles and Japanese characters, indicating a planned invasion in March or April 1942. Port Moresby was critical to Australia's defence. If Japan captured it, they would have airfields within striking distance of Australia's northeastern cities. They could cut the supply lines between America and Australia, potentially forcing Australia out of the war. The map from the I-124 gave Allied commanders weeks of advance warning to reinforce Port Moresby's defences and position naval forces to intercept any invasion fleet. When the Japanese finally launched their Port Moresby invasion attempt in early May 1942, they sailed directly into the Battle of the Coral Sea, where American carriers were waiting. The battle was tactically inconclusive but strategically decisive. Japan never captured Port Moresby, and their advance toward Australia was permanently halted. The German-Japanese technical collaboration documents from the wooden box opened an intelligence front that few Allied officers had anticipated. The documents revealed that Germany and Japan, despite being separated by thousands of miles and waging wars on opposite sides of the globe, were actively sharing military technology. The collaboration was sophisticated and systematic. German engineers were sharing U-boat designs and torpedo technology. Japanese engineers were providing information about naval aviation and carrier operations. Both nations were pooling research on radar, sonar, and radio communications. The implications were staggering. Any technological advantage one Axis power developed could potentially be shared with the other, multiplying the threat to Allied forces. British intelligence, when informed of these documents, immediately recognized connections to intelligence they had gathered from other sources. Bletchley Park had intercepted German communications mentioning Japanese naval attaché visiting German research facilities. British agents in neutral countries had reported unusual cargo being loaded onto German blockade runners bound for Japan. The I-124 documents provided the missing context, revealing that these weren't isolated incidents, but part of a comprehensive technology-sharing program. The Allied response was to establish their own intelligence-sharing protocols that went beyond anything previously attempted. British, American, and Australian intelligence agencies began systematic exchange of technical intelligence, creating networks that would eventually evolve into the post-war Five Eyes intelligence alliance. The personal effects recovered from the I-124 provided an unexpected window into Japanese naval culture and morale. Letters found in sailors' lockers revealed men who believed deeply in their mission, who trusted their leaders, and who expected to achieve victory. But the letters also showed homesickness, concern for families, and occasional doubts about the war's necessity. One letter from a young torpedo man to his mother spoke of missing cherry blossom season in Yokohama and hoping the war would end before the next spring. Another letter from a senior petty officer to his wife discussed pride in serving the emperor, but worry about his children growing up without a father. These weren't propaganda statements. They were private thoughts never meant for enemy eyes. The letters humanized the enemy in ways that made some intelligence officers uncomfortable, but provided crucial insights into Japanese military psychology. The morale intelligence proved particularly valuable for Allied propaganda efforts. Understanding what Japanese servicemen cared about, what they feared, what they missed, allowed Allied psychological warfare specialists to craft messages that might resonate with enemy troops. The intelligence also revealed that Japanese military morale, despite propaganda claims of fanatical devotion, was subject to the same pressures that affected any military force: separation from home, fear of death, concern for loved ones, and doubt about leadership decisions. This understanding would shape how Allied forces approached Japanese prisoners and how they crafted surrender appeals in the war's later stages. The maintenance logs recovered from the I-124 revealed operational vulnerabilities that Allied submarine commanders immediately exploited. The logs showed that Japanese submarines required maintenance after every extended patrol, that certain components failed with predictable regularity, and that repair facilities were concentrated in specific ports. This intelligence allowed Allied forces to identify where Japanese submarines were most likely to be vulnerable: in port, undergoing repairs, in transit to repair facilities, or operating with degraded capabilities due to deferred maintenance. American submarines began targeting Japanese boats as they entered or left port, achieving kills during periods when Japanese submarines were least combat ready. The maintenance intelligence also revealed supply chain vulnerabilities. Japanese submarines required specialized parts manufactured in Japan and shipped to forward bases. Disrupting these supply lines became a priority for Allied interdiction efforts. By April 1942, 3 months after the I-124 recovery, the intelligence windfall had been fully integrated into Allied operations. Code-breaking efforts had achieved new breakthroughs using the recovered code books as foundation. Submarine development was incorporating Japanese design improvements. Operational planning was accounting for Japanese strategic intentions revealed in captured documents. Technical intelligence teams were positioned throughout the Pacific, ready to exploit any opportunity for material recovery. The transformation was comprehensive and permanent. The I-124 recovery had demonstrated that battlefield intelligence exploitation could change the course of campaigns. Every Allied commander now understood that what the enemy left behind could be as valuable as what they took into battle. The human stories behind the I-124 recovery continued to unfold in ways that illustrated both the valor and the tragedy inherent in underwater salvage operations. Chief Petty Officer William Ridgway never fully recovered from the decompression sickness he suffered during the extended dives. He was medically discharged in June 1942. His diving career ended by injuries sustained recovering intelligence that helped win the war. He returned to civilian life in Sydney, working as a harbour pilot, never discussing the details of his military service. His family wouldn't learn about his role in the I-124 operation until decades after the war, when classified documents were finally released. Ridgway died in 1978, taking many secrets with him, but his contribution to Allied victory was finally acknowledged in naval history records that recognized the salvage operation as one of the most successful intelligence coups of the Pacific War. Lieutenant Commander Hugh Marsden received a commendation for the I-124 operation, but the citation was classified and couldn't specify what he had actually accomplished. He went on to command other salvage operations throughout the Pacific, recovering intelligence from wrecks in the Solomon Islands, New Guinea, and the Philippines. By war's end, Marsden had supervised the recovery of materials from 17 Japanese vessels, each operation adding to the growing body of technical and operational intelligence that guided Allied strategy. He remained in the Navy after the war, eventually retiring as a Rear Admiral in 1958. In his unpublished memoir, written in the 1970s but not released until 2005, Marsden described the I-124 operation as the most significant intelligence operation he ever commanded, noting that single recovery probably saved more Allied lives than any battle he witnessed. The Japanese Navy's response to losing the I-124 revealed both the strengths and weaknesses of their military culture. When the submarine failed to return from patrol, Japanese naval headquarters initially assumed it had been lost with all hands in deep water, making recovery impossible. They changed some tactical codes but didn't implement comprehensive security overhauls because they believed their codebooks had been destroyed by water-soluble paper. This assumption that their security procedures had worked as designed prevented them from recognizing the catastrophic intelligence compromise. Japanese naval officers couldn't conceive that Allied divers could recover materials from a sunken submarine, operate in conditions they considered impossible, and extract intelligence from water-damaged documents. This failure of imagination cost Japan dearly throughout the war. In Tokyo, the submarine's loss was recorded as a combat casualty, mourned appropriately, and filed away. No investigation examined whether the submarine might have been recoverable by enemy forces. No security review considered whether code books might have been captured. No intelligence assessment explored what the Allies might learn from a captured submarine. The institutional blindness that had allowed the I-124 intelligence disaster mirrored the same blindness that would plague Japanese security throughout the war. They consistently underestimated Allied capabilities, dismissed evidence of security compromises, and maintained faith in systems that had been comprehensively penetrated. The cultural factors that made Japanese military forces so formidable in combat, absolute confidence, unwavering, loyalty, rigid discipline, became liabilities in the intelligence war, where flexibility, skepticism, and constant reassessment were essential. By late 1942, the I-124 intelligence had been synthesized, distributed, and exploited to devastating effect. The submarine that had gone down off Darwin in January had yielded secrets that helped win battles thousands of miles away, shaped submarine designs that wouldn't enter service for years, and revealed strategic intentions that guided Allied planning through 1943 and beyond. The recovery operation had proven that technical intelligence could be as decisive as any weapon system. The men who had descended into that dark submarine, working alongside the dead to recover materials whose significance they barely understood, had struck a blow against Japan more effective than torpedoes or bombs. They had stolen knowledge, and in warfare, knowledge applied with skill and determination could determine who lived and who died, which nations survived, and which fell. The I-124 operation demonstrated this truth with clarity that would shape intelligence operations for generations to come. The long-term impact of the I-124 recovery extended far beyond the immediate intelligence windfall, reshaping how Allied forces approached underwater warfare and establishing precedents that would influence naval operations for decades. By mid-1942, the success of the Darwin salvage operation had inspired a systematic approach to battlefield intelligence recovery that transformed the Pacific War's intelligence landscape. The Navy established formal doctrine for what they termed combat salvage intelligence operations, creating specialized units trained specifically for recovering materials from enemy wrecks, downed aircraft, and captured facilities. These units would conduct over 200 intelligence recovery operations before the war ended, but none would match the comprehensive success of that first submarine recovery. The cryptographic intelligence from the I-124 continued yielding dividends throughout 1942 and into 1943. The code books had provided Allied cryptanalysts with a foundation for understanding Japanese submarine communications, but the real breakthrough came from understanding the structure and methodology of Japanese naval encryption systems. American cryptanalysts realized that Japanese encryption followed patterns rooted in their language's structure and their military's organizational culture. Japanese communications used honorific language even in encrypted messages, creating predictable patterns. Military ranks and unit designations followed standard formats that provided cribs for breaking new codes. Weather reports and position updates used stereotyped phrases that repeated across different encryption systems. These insights, first gained from studying the I-124 codebooks, allowed Allied cryptanalysts to break subsequent Japanese codes faster and more completely than would have been possible otherwise. Station Hypo at Pearl Harbor, the cryptanalytic center that would achieve fame for breaking Japanese naval codes before the Battle of Midway, built upon the foundation provided by the I-124 materials. Commander Joseph Rochefort, who led Station Hypo's cryptanalysts, later acknowledged in classified debriefings that the I-124 codebooks had accelerated their work significantly. The books confirmed theories about Japanese encryption methods that Rochefort's team had been developing through painstaking analysis of intercepted communications. Having physical codebooks allowed them to verify their assumptions, correct errors, and focus their efforts on the most productive analytical approaches. When Station Hypo achieved its famous breakthrough in May 1942, identifying Midway as the target of Japan's next major offensive, they were building on cryptanalytic foundations partially constructed from materials recovered from a submarine that had sunk 4 months earlier off Australia's northern coast. The technical intelligence from the I-124 influenced American submarine development in ways that became apparent only years later. The torpedo designs recovered from the submarine revealed sophisticated depth-keeping mechanisms and propulsion systems that American engineers studied intensively. By 1943, American torpedo manufacturers were producing weapons incorporating features inspired by Japanese designs. The notorious torpedo failures that had plagued American submarines in the war's first 2 years were gradually resolved through a combination of combat testing and insights gained from studying enemy weapons. The Mark 18 torpedo, introduced in 1943, used electric propulsion similar to Japanese designs, making it weightless and harder for enemy ships to detect. The improved Mark 14 torpedo, which finally began working reliably in 1943, incorporated depth-keeping improvements informed by Japanese engineering approaches. American submarine hull designs also evolved based on intelligence from the I-124. Japanese submarines could dive deeper than American boats, providing tactical advantages in combat and escape situations. The I-124's hull design, studied by naval architects at the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard, revealed construction techniques that strengthened pressure hulls without adding excessive weight. These insights influenced the design of the Gato and Balao-class submarines that would form the backbone of America's Pacific submarine force. By 1944, American submarines were diving to depths that would have been impossible for boats built in 1941, partly due to engineering improvements inspired by studying captured Japanese vessels. The technological exchange was ironic. Japan had begun the war with superior submarine technology, but by the war's end, American submarines had matched or exceeded Japanese capabilities in nearly every measure. The operational intelligence from the I-124 shaped Allied strategy throughout 1942 in ways that Japanese commanders never understood. The invasion plans found aboard the submarine revealed Japanese strategic thinking with remarkable clarity. Allied planners could see the logic behind Japanese operations, understanding how each conquest was designed to support subsequent advances. This understanding allowed Allied forces to position defenses not just where Japan was attacking, but where Japan intended to attack next. The result was a series of defensive victories that appeared to the Japanese as inexplicable Allied prescience. At the Battle of the Coral Sea in May 1942, American carriers intercepted a Japanese invasion force heading for Port Moresby, a target identified in documents from the I-124. At Guadalcanal in August 1942, American forces landed. Just weeks before Japanese forces planned their own operation in the Solomon Islands, an intention revealed in captured planning documents. The Japanese struggled to understand how the Allies seemed to anticipate their every move. Some Japanese officers suspected espionage, theorizing that spies had penetrated their planning staffs. Others believed American reconnaissance was more effective than Japanese intelligence had assessed. A few perceptive officers wondered if communications were being intercepted and decoded, but these concerns were dismissed by commanders who maintained absolute faith in Japanese cryptographic security. None suspected that a submarine lost in the war's opening weeks had carried materials that would help defeat Japan's entire Pacific strategy. The I-124's intelligence contribution was invisible to Japanese military leadership, a ghost ship whose secrets continued sinking Japanese operations long after its hull had settled on the ocean floor. The German-Japanese technical collaboration revealed by the I-124 documents prompted Allied intelligence to establish monitoring programs that tracked technology transfers between Axis powers throughout the war. British intelligence began systematically intercepting communications related to German-Japanese cooperation, using Bletchley Park's decryption capabilities to read messages about technology sharing. American intelligence established observation posts in neutral countries where German and Japanese officials met to exchange information. The intelligence gathered through these programs revealed that Axis technical cooperation was more extensive than previously understood, covering areas from submarine warfare to aircraft design to cryptographic systems. The revelation was sobering. The Allies were fighting enemies who, despite geographic separation, were systematically sharing their most advanced military technologies. The response was to accelerate Allied technical cooperation to levels that matched or exceeded Axis collaboration. British and American scientists began sharing research freely, establishing joint development programs for radar, sonar, proximity fuses, and countless other technologies. The Manhattan Project, developing atomic weapons, became the ultimate expression of this cooperation, bringing together British, American, and Canadian scientists in an unprecedented collaboration. Australian engineers contributed innovations in radar and communications that benefited all Allied forces. The technical cooperation, inspired by recognizing Axis collaboration, became a template for Cold War alliances, establishing patterns of intelligence and technology sharing that continued long after World War II ended. The human intelligence gained from personal effects aboard the I-124 shaped Allied psychological warfare efforts throughout the Pacific. The letters and diaries recovered from the submarine revealed that Japanese servicemen, despite propaganda, portraying them as fanatical warriors seeking death in battle, were human beings with the same hopes, fears, and doubts as soldiers everywhere. This understanding informed Allied efforts to encourage Japanese surrender, crafting messages that appealed to desires to survive and return home, rather than attempting to break supposedly fanatical morale. By 1945, when Japan's defeat was inevitable, Allied psychological warfare specialists were broadcasting surrender appeals that drew upon insights gained from materials like those recovered from the I-124. The appeals emphasized honorable survival rather than shameful defeat, using language and concepts that resonated with Japanese military culture. While Japanese military conditioning made surrender extremely difficult, even under impossible circumstances, the psychological warfare efforts based on cultural understanding achieved more success than approaches that treated Japanese forces as incomprehensible fanatics. The maintenance and logistics intelligence from the I-124 influenced Allied interdiction strategies throughout the war. Understanding that Japanese submarines required frequent maintenance, used specialized parts manufactured in Japan, and relied on forward repair facilities, allowed Allied forces to target Japan's submarine logistics network systematically. American submarines and aircraft attacked Japanese supply ships carrying submarine parts, bombed repair facilities, and mined harbors where Japanese submarines underwent maintenance. The cumulative effect was devastating. Japanese submarines increasingly operated with degraded capabilities due to deferred maintenance, suffered mechanical failures during critical operations, and spent more time in port awaiting repairs that couldn't be completed due to parts shortages. By 1944, Japan's submarine force had been effectively neutralized not just through combat losses, but through systematic destruction of their logistics network, a campaign informed by intelligence recovered from that first captured submarine. The institutional changes prompted by the I-124 recovery had effects that extended far beyond World War II. The specialized dive teams established to recover intelligence from underwater wrecks evolved into permanent Navy units that continued operating throughout the Cold War. These units conducted classified missions, recovering Soviet equipment from sunken submarines, retrieving crashed aircraft from the ocean floor, and salvaging intelligence materials from ships sunk during regional conflicts. The doctrine developed for combat salvage intelligence operations became standard Navy procedure, taught at specialized schools, and refined through decades of operations. The I-124 recovery had demonstrated that underwater intelligence operations could yield strategic benefits, establishing a military specialty that persists to the present day. The classification of the I-124 operation, maintained for over 30 years after the war, reflected both the sensitivity of the intelligence gained and the desire to protect operational methods for future use. Participants in the operation were bound by secrecy oaths that prevented them from discussing their role in recovering the submarine's contents. The dive team members returned to civilian life, carrying secrets they couldn't share with families, friends, or even other veterans. The cryptanalysts who exploited the recovered codebooks couldn't acknowledge that their breakthroughs built upon materials from a captured submarine. The intelligence officers who used the operational documents to guide Pacific strategy couldn't reveal the source of their insights. The silence was necessary but personally difficult for men who had achieved something extraordinary but couldn't claim recognition. When the I-124 operation was finally declassified in the 1970s, most participants were elderly or deceased. The recognition came too late for many who had risked their lives or devoted their skills to the recovery effort. Chief Petty Officer William Ridgway, whose leadership had made the operation possible, died before declassification, never receiving public acknowledgement for his role. Lieutenant Commander Hugh Marsden lived to see the operation's importance finally recognized, but many of his dive team members had passed away. The cryptanalysts who had used the recovered codebooks were finally able to discuss how the I-124 materials had accelerated their work, but several had died without ever being able to share the full story of their achievements. The delayed recognition was a common pattern in intelligence operations. The most successful operations remained secret longest, meaning the people who conducted them often died before receiving the public acknowledgement their achievements deserved. The I-124 wreck itself became a war grave, protected under international law and Australian regulations. The 80 crew, members who died when the submarine sank, remained with their vessel, their bodies never recovered. In 1972, when the wreck's location was revealed to Japanese officials, they requested permission to conduct memorial services. Australian authorities approved, and Japanese veterans organisations placed a memorial plaque near Darwin, commemorating the submarine and its crew. The ceremony was attended by former Australian dive team members who had recovered intelligence from the submarine 3 decades earlier. The meeting between former enemies at the memorial was emotional and complex. Australian veterans who had profited from the submarine's loss, standing beside Japanese veterans mourning comrades who had died aboard it. The memorial acknowledged that war creates tragedies for all sides, that the young men who died aboard the I-124 were victims of the conflict, regardless of which side they served. Modern analysis of the I-124 operation, conducted by military historians, with access to declassified documents from multiple nations, confirms that the recovery was one of the most successful intelligence operations of World War II. The materials recovered provided intelligence that influenced operations throughout 1942 and beyond, contributed to code-breaking breakthroughs that helped win crucial battles, shaped American submarine development for years, and revealed strategic intentions that guided Allied planning. The operation cost relatively little: a few weeks of dive team operations, some salvage equipment, and the courage of men willing to descend into a sunken submarine to recover materials whose value they could only guess. The return on that modest investment was incalculable, measured in battles won, lives saved, and strategic advantages gained. The lesson of the I-124 recovery resonates through military history: that intelligence can be as decisive as firepower, that understanding the enemy can matter more than overwhelming them, and that small teams conducting unglamorous missions can achieve strategic effects exceeding those of entire armies. The dive team that entered that dark submarine in January 1942 changed the course of the Pacific War as surely as any fleet action or amphibious assault. They demonstrated that in modern warfare, knowledge is a weapon as powerful as any ship or aircraft, and that the courage to gather that knowledge under dangerous conditions can determine who wins and who loses. The I-124 operation stands as testament to the reality that wars are won not just by those who fight bravely, but by those who think clearly, who recognize opportunities, and who risk everything to gain the intelligence advantage that can mean the difference between victory and defeat. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, You won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.